Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome to the Movers Mindset Podcast, where I talk with movement enthusiasts to learn who they are, what they do, and why they do it. My guest today is Nina Ballantyne. Welcome, Nina. How are you this evening? You're ahead of me 5 hours, 4 hours.
Well remembered. Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Greg. Good week, productive week. How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you so much for. Did we have like two false starts on this? I had like a
Oh,
major health.
maybe.
It's
Yeah,
like
there was
we had
a
like
few
we
things.
scheduled, and I think what happened is we had a what I call the pre-call, where we meet and chat and talk, and we're like, "This is great. We got to do a podcast." And then you scheduled, and then I think you had to bail, and
I had to mail.
2024 got deleted for me. So awesome. Let's get to it before I don't know, something else bad happens.
Sure.
I was talking to you beforehand about something I watched. It's from years ago, but I just rewatched it, where you were talking about jam spaces. So I'd like to start by talking about poking you to tell me about your ideas about jam spaces. And I was intrigued, the thing that I was listening to. You pointed out that a jam space, we all know it's magical for a bunch of reasons, but I hadn't really thought about your point, which was that there's no knot on the pitch like the jam, there's no divider between this is the jam space and that's the regular people space. And I thought that was an interesting, I hadn't really thought of it that way. I mean, I'm usually standing as far from the center of the jam space as I can back up. Um, but yeah, that struck me as a really interesting thing. So I guess like when did you first think of that, or have you always thought of it that way and then realized like some of us don't think of it that way?
I guess, I mean, these days folk would probably laugh to hear that I'm actually, can be a bit shy or nervous in kind of big social situations as well. But kind of like you, when I first started going to jams, like I didn't know anyone. It was the olden days, and I had to like send a message on a forum to find out where to meet. And like I was the
I had
only
to a
person I
pigeon.
knew who was going to be there. Yeah, like pretty much. And so I think it was actually like rocking up the first time. I was like, where does the jam start? Who do I talk to? What is
Oh,
the thing? It was. Whereas any other, like I wasn't really a very sporty kid, to be honest. I did a little bit of like taekwondo badly, and some like dance classes when I was very little. But that was like you went to a place and there was a door you went through and there was someone
right.
who told you, and it was like super structured. Um, and that was not the case for parkour. And there are now obviously indoor spaces where there is a bit more of that, but jams, the vast majority of the time, you're in spaces that are not exclusively yours and were usually not built for you to do parkour on. And so um, I think it's one of the weird ironies about parkour in general is that the physical barriers in theory are so low, even though we talk about overcoming obstacles and all the rest of it, like to actually get started. But like
Right.
to walk into a jam, there isn't really anything in your way apart from this sort of established like social or cultural or psychological norms that are a kind of mix of like in your head and in everyone else's heads around you. So I've always found that kind of really interesting. And I guess that it is a really positive thing in that way, in theory, that you can kind of be anyone and accidentally find yourself in a jam almost, which has happened. And like one of the coaches in Edinburgh that I've worked with, I think that was kind of how he started. Like he stumbled on a jam, was like, "Oh, I've seen this." How And that was his first ever jam, and
I'm
was
standing literally in the middle of
yeah,
it. Oh, look,
yeah. And
it's all
then,
around me.
but then the flip side of that is that because if you've grown up in a world where physical activity or group activity happens in a certain space with direction and kind of strict guidance or forms or whatever, it can be weirdly uncomfortable and you don't know what to do or how to behave or what to act. And like every space we have, like parkour's been around long enough now that there are kind of parkour norms, like sort of expected cultural things in most jams that are common around the world. And then there are like hyper specific and more like local versions of that as well. Like, do you like handshake or dap or fist bump or like whatever? Like there's that
Yeah.
vary, and you'll know when you've got it wrong, and you've like, oh, this isn't how they do the stuff in like Valencia, or like, oh, this isn't a whatever where you've turned up to. And so I think it's a bit of an interesting paradox with a lot of very positive potential for increasing engagement and a wider range of people being able to do what I think is a really fun thing to do, which is parkour, but also having a barrier that's not physical but can be actually much harder to get over for some people than the physical barrier.
I'm like nodding along. There's no video, right? but Nina can see me. I'm thinking I hadn't really thought until just listening to you describe that. I hadn't really um, teased apart, taken apart, deconstructed the like I didn't do dance, but I did things where you went to the door and you had to fill out the form and then you get going and then it's organized. And when you said you're talking about the barrier, I'm like, oh yeah, because when you do that thing, it's the exact same barrier. Like, am I skinny enough to be showing up to do this thing as I cross the
Mm,
parking lot? Like,
sure.
so it's like, yeah, parkour should be so much easier because it eliminates the physical and that the jam thing should make it
Yeah.
easier because you're only left with the problem which one brings with oneself.
Yeah.
All right, we'll just talk about me. I brought it with me when I showed up.
Well, yeah, but it didn't come. It wasn't like it didn't bloom from nothing. Like you're a reflection, obviously, of
Right.
all the stuff that's been put on
Yeah, the
you
nurture.
by the world or your family or your classmates or whoever over the time. So I think, yeah, don't give yourself too hard a time for that one. Like you live in a world that have other people in it, and
Yeah.
whether we like it or not, that kind of means that we're all a little bit responsible for each other, I guess.
Well, yeah, sure. One of the things I always loved about um, this whole thing was the culture that it was just like right from the very beginning. It was to me, it was obvious that the people who were doing the thing had some kind of understanding about if whether you want to do it in French or English, whatever, that we're all together and we're trying to trying to kill each other here. We're trying to make each other better.
Sure.
Notwithstanding some crazy stories.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's a really interesting that how we're kind of talking about the jam idea as a tool, and of course when you show up your first jam, you don't really realize that you're going to get your problems solved or that you're going to have to work on your problems, but that's what
Sure.
happens. You do a lot of coaching for, and I don't want to say people who are marginalized, but for people who are marginalized. Do you find that their experience, like, is it worse for them or is it better for them because they're used to every space has that stupid barrier around? You see what I'm getting at? Like,
Yeah. I mean, like, I'd sort of caveat by saying I don't do as much as I kind of often feel I ought to or probably could. And that's partly because it took me quite a long time to think of myself as someone who was marginalised in public space because I was always a bit of a tomboy and kind of didn't mind rough and tumble with the lads. And it was quite a weird thing to realise that I was the odd one out just by being a girl or by being a woman. And it was almost like as an adult, like late teens, before I really kind of understood that. And in some ways, that was quite lucky because I kind of wasn't really walking into places thinking, oh God, I'm the only girl, or oh God, like I didn't
hmm,
really get that awareness until I was like quite old, and you can just blame that on being like oblivious, I think, and not particularly socially like um cognizant. But I think like Kel Glaister, who we talked about before, and a couple other brilliant people, so Fiona, Ellie, Kate, Angie, loads of like brilliant women in Glasgow. It was kind of through training with them and meeting them and talking to them that kind of opened my eyes to some stuff that I had been oblivious to but had been happening the whole time, which is as soon as someone pointed it out, I was like, oh yeah. And sometimes that was just about like the ratio at a jam.
yeah.
But sometimes it was about behavior and like people not behaving super well or being patronizing to people in a way that was like more so than just being new. Because like you kind of have everyone try to be helpful to new people, and that's like it's actually quite a sweet kind of motivation, I think. But it can sometimes tip to if someone is older than you expect, or if someone's a woman which you're not expecting, or if someone's maybe a different ethnicity and you've got assumptions about their race or like where they're from, or if they're disabled in some way that's visible and you've got made assumptions about what they can or can't do, you can tip from this like kind of wholesome motivation to like support someone who's new to your space and make them feel welcome
Hmm.
into like I know better than this person and I'm going to tell them how they should behave in this space or what they should focus on rather than being led by that person who obviously knows themselves best. And I think the 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 paradox thing I was talking about before, the the thing that like anyone who is used to feeling the odd one out in a public space, particularly a public space, um, is you're aware of additional scrutiny. So, and this can also be true, like if you are if you're big, like you take up more space than the average person, that there are more people who are going to be looking at you than they will like an average sized person. Or yeah, it's I feel most confident talking about it when it comes to gender because I'm a woman and I get kids every week asking me if I'm a girl or a boy, and so there's kind of all that stuff going on as well. But like the principle of basically everything you do having more attention on it than it might do otherwise when you're the odd one out, that you can apply it to just any context. And that's, you can flip it the other way, like men who work in female dominated sectors like childcare and stuff as well, like if they're going through school for like nursery or early years education, it's a big thing comes up there, is everyone has eyes on them as well. So it's about
Hmm.
like the context as well. But averaging things out in society at large, for certainly where I've trained most of my life, which is like Scotland or bits of Western Europe, um, I think those fears of standing out, like you already stand out walking, being like normal. So if you then climb up a lamppost or are like jumping, or even worse, not making a jump, like fucking up and looking like a tit and landing on your arse, like it's like it kind of piles on what you might think of as like the normal level of like embarrassment or awareness. And I think parkour, what I love about it is, well, one of the many things I love about it is it can be a incredible tool for for overcoming that, for kind of building up your barriers, not even barriers, but like building up your like I don't give a fuckness,
Yeah.
um to kind of let you be silly, rekindle a little bit of joy, creativity, even in a space that's public. Um, and that's different in different places too. So like we were chatting a little bit earlier about like public spaces between, like the difference in public spaces and cultural expectations between like the parts of Scotland and the US. And I think it would be naive not to like acknowledge that if you're like a young black guy, for example, and you're the only one in a public space and you're acting like weirdly, I was in quotation marks, like by doing parkour,
Yeah. What the public doesn't
you
think of as normal, right?
yeah, like you are absolutely gonna have to think about safety in a way that someone like me, who is white and is like a sweet little lassie, will not. Like I lost the no, I broke the key for my bike lock the other day. This is just an example of this, right? I broke the key trying to fix another bit of parkour equipment in a school, and meant that my bike lock and my bike was attached, and there was no way. Like I contacted the company, there was no replacement key coming. I had to go borrow an angle grinder to cut my own bike free. So so I have an angle grinder
And you're stealing a bike.
outside a children's primary school in broad daylight, sparks flying, and not a single person even like says, are you meant to? Like nothing. Like
Mm.
if I looked a different way, like I think that would have been a very, very different story. And it's something that's like it's impossible to keep in your head all the time, but like I think it's worth trying to remind yourself that like these things are all quite context dependent, and
Mm.
there are some kind of universal things, but maybe not everything. But so the like the kind of the empowerment and the kind of liberation to not care what other people think of you does have a limit for some folk, I guess is what I'm saying. So I love it. I think for me it's been great and really powerful, and I really like not caring anymore about being bad at stuff in particular. Like that's so freeing. I was like a proper nerd at
Mm.
school, and like my thing was that I got good marks, and like God, the joy of just being like, oh, I suck at this, isn't this great? Like it's real nice. And but just I kind of want to carry that with the thing that there's like there's maybe a limit for some people in some contexts as to how liberating that can be while the rest of the world hasn't moved on yet, I guess.
Yeah. I was just thinking of like flashing through my head are all the jam stories, and I was like, oh, yeah. So many options. Um, without a turn signal. So tell me about the church that you're buying. I also want to know more about the church.
Well, aye, this churches are interesting things as well because
Oh,
we
I don't
sort
do
of.
segues, but just
Well, no, just because, like, so, all right, for folk who've not heard this saga, which why would you have heard this saga unless you live in like 2.5 specific postcodes in Edinburgh? But there's a church, like 140-year-old church being sold off in my neighbourhood, um, by the Church of Scotland, um, and initially through my work at Access Parkour, but now independently as chair of a new charity. Um, I, not myself, but with a group of other people, are trying to buy this church as a community asset to maintain a whole host of services and activities that have been run there for years and years and years, and also to introduce some new activities, including but not limited to parkour.
mm,
So it's an absolute mammoth project. Really interesting, has driven me nuts at points. But one of the things that we've done as part of this is we got some funding to do some historical research on the building, the communities around it, both looking in the archives, but also working with this brilliant historian, Dr. Julian Grant, shout out, who interviewed a lot of the old congregation members and other people who'd been involved with the building, um, as part of an oral history kind of element to the project too. And this culminated in an exhibition and a couple of events. And one of the things that in the events that came up was this idea of how your impression of a church building is kind of culturally dependent and context dependent on how you were raised, where you're from, what time period we're talking about. And for a long time, a church kind of steeple in in Scotland, certainly in the UK at large, it had a kind of conveyed an element of stability. There was often charitable works attached to churches, a kind of certainty, a beacon, the idea of sanctuary spaces. The kind of the biggest hall in the building is still the sanctuary hall, um, but actually for other people, it seemed imposing, unfriendly, a door that you wouldn't be welcomed through, and symbolic of either intolerances, or perhaps, I guess, like small c conservatism, which, depending on who you are, would be a very different set of associations with the church. So it's that thing again where the world is not as like black and white as we always like it to be, because humans like things to be easy and kind of have neat boxes for stuff, but usually there are shades of grey in it. And annoyingly, the answer is usually it depends. Not always.
mm.
Some things you can say like that's wrong, we shouldn't do that. Some things you say that's good, we should probably do more of that. But often you have to say it depends. And so the church is one of those things where what we want to see is kind of take all the the positives of that heritage, like kind of old school Christian values of charity and compassion and love that were responsible for things like the food bank that's operated out of there, the like loads of groups for children and young people, um, groups for folk who are recovering from addiction issues, music, like huge amount of like kind of the secular music heritage that
Mm.
has been hosted there, and hopefully make sure that folk who have not felt welcome until that point, and I think most of them, if they come through the doors, like it's a really lovely group of people. Like we've been working with the Kirk Session, which is kind of like the board of management of a local church in Scotland, is what it's called, the Kirk Session. And they are, yeah, they're brilliant, compassionate, funny folk, and kind of filled with grace in every sense. And I think that thing where if you had gone through the doors, almost everyone would have been warmly welcomed. But that thing we were talking about before, that your own assumptions and the assumptions that have been given to you and the examples that you've seen other places would mean that you would never take that step, would mean that you'd never find out. Whereas hopefully we can kind of as the project progresses, and if we are successful in completing this purchase and everything else, we have some doors that are always open, and are seen to be open in a very kind of loud and visible way.
Tell me the name of the organization, like, because I think this went from being like, oh, we had this crazy idea to like, oh, actually, we started doing this for realsies.
Yeah, so the charity that we've founded, Jaskeel, which is like a Scottish kind of charity form, fully registered, insured, all the rest of it, is Leith St Andrews Trust. St Andrews happens to be the patron saint of Scotland. That's quite
Mm.
nice. And Leith is the neighbourhood where the church is, but the church was formerly the Leith St Andrews Church, and we are now the Leith St Andrews Trust, because we are hoping to remain the trustees of said building, or become, no, we're not there yet, become the trustees
Are there
of the
any
building.
are there any competing plans? Like, if people in the sound of my voice need to go like dox somebody, is there another organization that? No, don't
No,
do
I
that.
think
I'm making a joke.
there's I mean the so it's not fully on, like, not formally on the market yet, so technically there are no competitors right now because there's no one else, but the most likely alternatives seem to be either another religious group or another Christian denomination would want the building, or developers possibly. Like, it's a bit of a long shot for property developers, but Edinburgh is like a unbelievable bubble in terms of the property market here, where there's, boxes getting thrown up in every alleyway you can think of, and people being charged thousands of pounds to live there.
Hmm.
But basically, if it's not us, there's no other kind of community based group vying for this, and the most likely consequence of it being sold off in the open market would just be that the community would lose access to the building, whatever it was. Whether it was another religious group, it would be the folk have expressed interest in maintaining it as a closed place where they may choose to mission out to the local community, but they're
Hmm.
not interested in really hosting external groups inside, which has kind of been one of its strengths through its history, is that it has always had these connections to kind of other
Hmm.
disparate religious and secular groups.
Super interesting. I kind of want to say, geez, that still feels exactly like parkour to me. I feel like, what's the on commence ensemble? And I feel like there's the esprit de corps there, and maybe some community. This all feels like the same thing, Nina.
I mean, I think there's overlaps, but I kind of, I don't know, like, we all, like, we contain multitudes, but so does the world, and we're all, like, everything we do is connected in some way, right? Like, that sounds very
Yep.
hippie-ish, but I don't mean in a sort of like, necessarily like we all have to be pals way, but the time I've spent in the parkour world definitely influences what I do outside of it, and the stuff I do outside of it definitely influences what I do in the parkour world. And I think that's probably true for most parkour practitioners I've ever met, yourself included. Yeah, and I there is definitely, like I say, I mean, it sprang out initially of like direct parkour involvement, but that the community driven elements of it and maintaining, space for kind of lots of things and cross pollination, I think, is something that's actually become quite common in parkour spaces around the world. So a
Hmm.
lot of parkour spaces are not exclusively parkour anymore, and I think, like, in sort of purpose built parkour spaces are not exclusively parkour anymore, and mostly, I think, to their strength, and it gives a little different flavour to the movement you see in different places as well, which I think is quite interesting.
Hmm. I was just, I think Access Parkour has a fairly new practice space. I'm not sure how old my news is.
So, so the reason why the church project came up is because our rent was getting doubled in the old space.
Oh.
So before I stepped down as, like, kind of managing like all the back end stuff for Access, we reached an agreement with a new kind of venue in North Edinburgh called the Pit, which is a warehouse space again, but is like a shared space and kind of outside of our traditional neighborhood, I guess.
Mm.
So like kind of a couple further neighborhoods over. But yeah, that's where the workshop I was talking about on Saturday happens. So the new space at the pit, which is on the waterfront, which is always very nice.
I was the reason I mentioned it was I was just thinking, oh, you know what? We were talking about how jam spaces are magical because there's no edge of the pitch. You're not on or off. And you're talking about this, I don't know whether to call it a church project or a community space project. And one of the key features of it is, yes, this is already a space. It doesn't, I mean, the upstairs where the big doors are and the, the things and the big guys at the front, that space has there's a clear line. But all the rest of the buildings, auxiliary spaces, they're already these liminal things like a parkour jam space. And so I was just thinking, I wonder if I hate to say this on a microphone, aversion to training in indoor purpose-built parkour spaces, I've been in a few, is maybe the thing I don't like is that it has a line, and not a get in line queue, but like you got to
Sure.
cross the line. Maybe I'm just like, oh, now I have more thinking to do.
But I mean, I'm the same as you, to be
Thanks
honest.
a
I
lot.
think I yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but I'm the same as you. I think I'd always there's something just as slightly like the sense of fulfillment I get from training outdoors, and it's specifically to do with the fact that it's not purpose built, like that you're repurposing it just by being there using it. It's like gives it like a little extra like flavor, spice,
Yeah.
texture that it does to somewhere where you're like, oh, it's allowed here, and we've done this specially for you. Whereas I think maybe it's because I grew up like I had too safe a childhood, but I'm like, oh, the little bit where it's like it wasn't built for me to do this like weird stuff on, so it's kind of like an extra level fun because I'm being a bit of a badass, like even though obviously like the least badass
4 inches
person
off the
around.
ground, right?
Yeah, no, 100%, like on the curb, just loving life. But and I think one of the things though that gave me like a more like that made me feel warmer towards indoor spaces and purpose built spaces was seeing how they acted as that like um kind of staging post for folk who would never go directly to a jam. I would never go directly to an outdoor class. And that
That's a
I
good
think comes
point.
back to what we talked about, like marginalized groups as well. The scrutiny, you're taking out the scrutiny. The scrutiny of your classmates, sure, if you're going to a class, like still you're talking about, but like everyone's agreed to be there to be weird.
Yeah. And there's a door on a wall,
And there's a
right?
door on a wall, and you don't have to worry about like somebody phoning the police. You don't have to worry about just getting stuff, but like
Right.
somebody or just
Right.
shouting
No.
at you, like shouting nice tits at you or whatever. Like that shouldn't be happening in an indoor purpose-built space. So there's a whole bunch of folk who I think and like folk have said explicitly to me, like I would never have started parkour if my only option was outdoor training. And so I
Mm,
kind of I like that gave me like a good like a better sense of perspective on the like utility and potential of that, and made me feel less like, oh, it's no real parkour, because like that's a very like that becomes then elitist again in a different way. So I kind of
yes.
needed to like
Yeah. That's
wind
an
my own neck in.
enablest, yeah, point of view.
Yeah, but I'm
Hmm.
with you. I would always, I think, given the option, I think there's a little bit more of just the kind of joy and silliness of doing it all outside
Yeah, I
is
certainly don't
great.
mean to diss on because there's people I know who are really good friends of mine, people who listen, who have poured their hearts, souls, and every last dollar, and then more dollars
And then yeah,
into
big time.
into building spaces. And I don't mean to diss on that effort because I think that's um, it's obviously they're serving the community at large, whatever larger community they're physically embedded in, they're serving that community, whether or not the community likes you. But it's just, I'm saying for me, it's always like, oh, I don't know. It's not like I had like a little kiddie gymnastics background and I'm scarred from that or anything. It's just, I don't love it. Says the guy
Yeah.
who's going to an indoor parkour class tonight. Now that I think of it, like, I'm getting back on the horse this evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
mean, excited for you for your class tonight. I think that was going to be very fun.
I hope I didn't jinx it. That's how you break your leg skiing. One more run, and then, yeah, no, it's,
Yeah, maybe. Nah, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It'll be good.
yeah.
But I think yeah, and it's not like I guess the difference is like whether is insisting that your tiers of preference are absolute and
Oh,
objective and
yes.
universal, rather than just like,
Yes.
hey, that's me or that's Craig or whatever. And I don't think for a second you're doing that. But I think folk are so used to hearing differences of opinion as attacks on their opinion that, do you know,
Yeah.
like that we there's a sort of automatic like, oh well, if I and it's like it's not like a kind of big P political thing to be like, oh, I love training outdoors more, and I think I probably always will. It doesn't mean that you who loves training indoors more is wrong or bad, or I think that. And I like would hate like taking away stuff that other people enjoy. It's just like it's just you're just grinching all over the place.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that's just the thing to bear in mind with stuff like that, maybe.
Mm.
Um, and why I'm really grateful for folk who have like told me things that I'm like, ah, that's because you're a different person. So you like obviously different people will have different views and experiences or lives, and therefore, isn't it good to remember that when you're kind of making, or not you, me, when I'm making broad
Yeah.
sweeping statements about things.
Pronouns. I was having a conversation, completely different context, doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of side channeled someone and said, the larger conversation was kind of talking about community. And in the process of like just listening to this conversation that was happening, this big like Hollywood Square Zoom call, it occurred to me that there was I'm going to call it story time. It's not really story time, but there was a story time that always was on the end of the original outdoor classes that I used to go to. And I don't know that I realized this until right up until the moment when I went, oh, that. And sometimes the story time was like, let me tell you about, this crazy thing that I did with them. Or sometimes it would be like, let's talk about, words or definitions. It's parkour related as a parkour
Cool.
class. So it'd always be something about that. Um, but looking back at that, I don't know, for me, that was like, the experience was, oh, this is the kind of space where we talk about those kinds of, like horrible injuries, or we talk about,
Mm.
history, or we talk about how, as a group, all these people who jump on stuff, how we're misperceived, or we like, it was just this. So I'm often find myself talking about community, and I hear people talking about community, and there's always the eternal, how do I get more people to show up to my parkour classes? And I wonder what your thoughts are around that. I don't want to call it storytelling. Like, I want to call that like sharing the mythology, maybe. Like, have
Mm.
you ever thought about, as somebody who's trying to create an experience for people who are showing up outdoors, have you ever thought about, how do I put some shared mythology into this? And maybe I'm completely making a thing up that doesn't exist.
No, but you're making me think of a few different things, and I'm just trying to work out where to try and
We have three
answer and
seconds.
what
Hurry
to
up.
answer first. Shit.
Just kidding.
No, so I think there's something about indoor and like slightly more permanent spaces that are really helpful for organizing, both in a like political old school trade union organizing sense, but also if
Mm.
you want to make anything happen. Like I have been to many meetings in outdoor jam spots over the years, trying to organise like early events in Scotland or whatever else, and everyone's got like their pen and paper, like in the wind's blowing and whatever else, and you're all like huddled round the one cup of hot coffee. Um, and I think having a space that folk can drop by and say hello to, that there's always someone there, which isn't always how like a parkour gym or whatever would work, but that's um can be a good kind of additional thing that we've not really talked about. Whereas you can turn up to a parkour spot, and if it's not been a prearranged thing, there's no guarantee you'll see someone else there. So it's like that thing about building community. In terms of the storytelling, and I guess like trying to establish what either like share culture or establish a kind of shared culture, or exchange culture. um I I've been doing parkour long enough that I remember like the really intense and deeply boring debates about what is and what isn't parkour. And
Yes.
folk really, and it was like, and it was because everyone cared, and because parkour meant so much to them. It was like their own personhood was kind of questioned
Yeah.
or attacked or whatever. And I get it. And like also a lot of folk involved, myself included, were really, really young. Um, But I think that, so I guess I'd be much more wary these days of telling people like what parkour is or what their parkour should be, and what's true parkour and what's fake and what's all this. Um, but I think what you can do is in your immediate space, so your own networks, like folk that you have an actual relationship with, that are not strangers on the internet, crucially. They can be like peers, training partners, like students if you are coaching, or your coach if you're in a kind of student space. I think what you can do is just say like, when we're training all our parkours together, you can discuss what is important to you and other people what's important to them, and you kind of try to build understanding about that. And that can be what's important to you in terms of like, I fucking love Kongs, like double Kongs, like max and compies. Like
Yes.
that's the thing. It's like at that level, technique level, where you're like, the thing I love most is X, and you're like, okay, sick. Well, like if I know if I'm with this person, that's going to be like, that's going to dominate the practice that we have that day, and that's cool. But someone else could be like, for me, I really love it. Not because of, and this is something like Richard Marshall's talked about, who I don't know, I assume you've probably come across at some point. Richard Marshall in Edinburgh, like older practitioner, Sonia
Mhm.
Marshall's dad,
Doesn't ring a
famously.
bell, but
Oh,
that doesn't
okay.
mean they're not popular or all.
No,
Just
no. So
I'm
Richard's
not in
Richard's
Edinburgh. I've
no,
been there
that's true.
once.
That's true. I just like Richard looms so large in my mind as a sort of
Yeah, I'm
example
there
of
on
this.
Tuesdays.
Like, so Richard gave a really great presentation at Coach Europe, the year it was held in Valencia, which is this kind of parkour coaching conference that I helped put on a while ago. And he, like I say, is an older practitioner. He's in his 60s, and he said that what he's had to like push up against people, coaches particularly over the years, is the idea that parkour is about challenge for everyone. Because he said, trust me, like I have, I'm done with challenge. My job is super stressful. I'm involved in these really high profile like litigation cases internationally. Like I have a family that rely on me earning. I have all these things. Like for me, actually what is so important to me about parkour is the space it allows me for play, which is not possible in so many other parts of my life. Like it isn't so like he kind of has a background in tech, and so there's creative elements in tech, and stuff. But he talked about that, and I thought that was really interesting because for me, the fun and the challenge have always been kind of intertwined. It's the fun of like progressing in the challenge, and I think maybe that's true a little bit for Richard too. But he was like, honestly, like I'm never ready to go out and like grind myself in a parkour class for the sake of just being like, I worked hard. Whereas like for me, sometimes that is a motivating factor and a really great
Mm.
experience. And you just finish and you're like manky and sweaty and disgusting and like, but you feel great, and you feel great sheerly from having exerted effort. Like you maybe don't even have any new jumps to show for it. You just know that you were like really giving it your all. He's like, nah, no interest. He's like, it's got to be fun and silly and playful, and I've got to like feel that little kid feeling of like new possibilities opening up. And I think the way you get to understand all those different perspectives that we have in this world is being quite explicit about making time for it. Like ask folk if they seem like they've got a moment for talking, like what are you working on? Oh, why do you like it? Be ready to talk about what you're into, like maybe not quite as at length monologuing as I've done today. But if you're a coach and you've got like that kind of weird sort of position of like slight authority in the structure of the class or whatever, but I think most parkour coaches don't go like too hard in for like a hyper authoritarian sort of approach to that. But like if you do, you can make space for explaining why you have structured a class a certain way, what you have hoped people would get out of it, why you think that's important, but leave space for there to be other interpretations, I guess.
Mm.
Um, and I don't want to go, yeah, it's not like, I say, it's not like there are never, sometimes there are wrong answers and right answers, but I think leaving space to hear from other folk. And if you want to impart certain values, like make sure you're doing your best to live them. Like you can't, like none of us are perfect, and it's a grind. Like I've seen a lot of parkour practitioners really like like make themselves not well with this idea of being a sort of
Yeah.
perfect role model for their community or their students or whatever else. And like that's no, like it's fine. Like I think it's really important that you cannot know more than your students about everything. You shouldn't. And you're a chump if you think that you do, because like you're. And I'm not coming for anyone in particular. This isn't like, but like if you don't have, yeah, like it is really really rare that you know more about someone else's body than they do. You might know more about biomechanics, but that's different from knowing more about their body and their
Yeah.
life and their experience. And I think
Exactly.
that bit is like, yeah, don't be scared to share what you love, what you think is important. Don't be scared to listen to what other people love and what they think is important. But if you care about, yeah, creating shared culture, shared community, and this sense of um yeah, something more than just like a normal kind of sports class, I guess make explicit space for it. Like ask those questions. I think a lot of things we hope come naturally actually need a little bit more prodding than we'd like them to.
That's brilliant, Nina. Terrific. My neck's getting sore from nodding along. And I purposely try and crack a joke. Every time you take a sip of tea, I try to see if I can get you to spit your tea out.
It's
I
cool.
will, I will just say, and of course, the final question: 3 words to describe your practice.
So I was thinking about this because I don't want to be like totally taken by surprise here. I think the neighbourhood I live in Edinburgh has a motto. Like it used to be a separate city from Edinburgh, and the motto of the place I live is perseverance. And I really like that as both a value and a sort of like uh, articulation of my practice. Is that I've anyone who's met me will tell you that I've not got like the biggest jumps in the world, and I've had many months off training altogether in time. But the perseverance that kind of keeps coming back and now plugging away. I think the empowering nature I spoke about earlier. So empowering. For me, parkour has been really, really helpful for me in that way. Um, and silly, maybe. So there you go, perseverance or persevere. I guess it's the wrong. They're not all quite neat. They're not all verbs or nouns or adjectives, but yeah, perseverance, empowerment, and silliness.
Terrific. Well, Nina, tickled pink that we got a chance to actually press record. Presuming I haven't dropped the technology, lost the
No,
file,
likewise.
screwed it up in shipping. It
It's
will
been a real
eventually become a
honor.
thing. Yeah, I hope it'll be awesome. Thank you for making the time to sit down. I know you're super busy, and I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
No, my absolute pleasure, Craig. Thank you so much.